Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and it is time for the next installment in my top 100 games of all time. These are my absolute favorite board and card games ever. I love them. I think they should be in every board gamer's collection, assuming, of course, the game is right for you. Now, this part of the list is number 60 to number 51, which means we're really close to the top 50, and I'm getting more and more excited. I love it. There's great games on the horizon. I'll say that this chunk of the list is pretty diverse, which is really cool. I like to have a wide variety of different styles and themes of games. And I'll also say that, as usual, we're going to have comments from the Board Game Geek community, divergent opinions, if you will. And I am particularly fond of the comments that I pulled out for this section of the list. Let's not build up any more suspense and get right to it. Kicking off today's section of the list, my number 60 is Quarriors from WizKids. Now, I mentioned at the end of the last part of the list that there would be a bit of a cliffhanger in the form of my number 61, which was Marvel Dice Masters. There would be no Marvel Dice Masters were it not for Quarriors, and a lot of people like Dice Masters more. They think it's like an upgraded version of Quarriors. But for me, the original still works better. That's mostly because Quarriors, right out of the box, can be played with up to, or right out of the tin, depending on which version you have, can be played with up to 4 players, and it gives me more of a deck building feel. That was the whole thing with Quarriors, was that it was a deck building game, which is my favorite mechanic, but it uses dice instead, and I think it does it very well, and I get more of that deck building feeling here than I do in Marvel Dice Masters, which is leaning more towards the Magic the Gathering style of gameplay. The theme is a bit pasted on, but I still like it. I like all the artwork. I hate all of the cues and all of the words and expansions like Gladiator and all that. Always play with the advanced rules and do your best to get the some of the expansions like Quartifax, which really enhance the game. But even on its own, it's a very fun game. It is random, but there's ways to mitigate that randomness, and I love it. It's a great, fantastic game, great family game, easy to learn, but there is strategy to be had. That is Quarriors from WizKids, my number 60. However, Callistus says, when I played Dominion, I always thought it needed more luck, a runaway leader mechanic, and less card interactions. Wait, no I didn't. Alright, for my number 59, this is the first of 2 entries on today's section of the list, and I'm going to cheat a little on and put 2 games in the same spot. That is King of Tokyo and King of New York, both from Yellow Games. They're both essentially the same game. King of New York enhances some things. There's some different dice and there's some different options that you have around the board, but they still play generally the same, and you can take monsters from either set and mix them together as well. And that is to say, when I say they're the same game, they're both same fantastic game. This is a great gateway entry point for people who are new into modern board games and a way to get you to play even more complex and strategic games. It's just fun Yahtzee dice rolling, so this is sort of Yahtzee evolved with a super cool theme of being giant monsters rampaging around New York or Tokyo and getting special powers like mutations and fangs and fire breathing and wings and using them against the other players, trying to either get victory points or win by destroying all the other monsters. So you have lots of different options in the game. It's cool getting the little energon cubes and just rolling those dice and just I mean, it's a great game. Good for so many different types of groups of people. It's always been a hit in my group, and I'm sure it always will be. That is either King of Tokyo or King of New York from Yellow Games, my number 59. However, Fun Lover says, one of the dumbest games I have ever played. There is no strategy nor fun to be had. Just because the designer is Mr. Magic, Richard Garfield, doesn't mean his stuff doesn't stink. The good ratings are real example of fanboys at their worst. My number 58 is the other cheat on this section of the list, and it is from Cryptozoic Entertainment, and I'm going to call it the Cerberus deck building engine line of games, but I'll go ahead and say that its number 1 representative is the DC Comics deck building game. They also had Naruto and Street Fighter and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but the DC one is the most popular probably because of the theme. Now the thing is, a lot of people criticize this game and a lot of its brethren because it just has, let's say, a pasted on theme that doesn't really make a lot of sense. In this game, it's a deck building game, and the currency that you have are punches and kicks and power in general that you use to get equipment and other heroes and villains, and then you put those villains into your deck even though you're supposed to be represented by heroes. and you're battling the other heroes for some reason. So yeah, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't make a ton of sense, but I'll tell you what, I'm not just doing the dirty work of the BGG community here and describing it. It is a great gateway deck building game, and a very fast and addictive one at that. The game is simple enough, but offers some strategy, and it encourages combos, getting really uber powerful cards, building up, and making a big play. And you might think that that's very unbalanced, and sure it is, but I'll tell you what, the game is fast. As long as you only play with 3 or 4 people, it goes really, really quickly. Downtime is not too much of an issue. There's interaction between the players even before Star Realms came along, and I just like it. It works with so many different people, and it's just been a big hit in my group, so how can I possibly complain about that? I still enjoy it to this day, and it still gets better and better with each of the expansions that come out. That is the DC Comics deck building game primarily, but any of the games in the Cerberus line of games, because they're essentially the same. That is my number 58 from Cryptozoic Entertainment. But Memorare says, punch and kick your way to owning the Batmobile. Avoid. My number 57 is a game that was almost ruined by its own terrible rulebook, but for those who were willing to work through it, you found a fantastic deck building game, a cooperative one at that, one of the first that just had a wonderful theme and awesome gameplay. That is Shadow Rift from Game Night Productions. This is a game that's all about taking a group of fantasy, you and the other players represent like sort of fantasy warriors like D&D, and you're trying to protect this village from oncoming waves of monsters coming out of these portals. And you have all these different monsters that you can choose to randomly select and put into your game. It might be like frost giants or demons or undead or whatever it might be. And you have to protect the townsfolk and use deck building mechanics to buy different items and magic spells to put into your decks in order to either seal the Shadow Rifts, these portals, or to build magical walls around the city and protect it forever. And man, it is hard, it is brutally hard, but it is super thematic, it's super cool. Again, another deck building game. I guess this is the chunk of the list for deck building games, but it just works really, really well. Again, you have to get through that rule book, and there are updated rules available, but if you can get a copy of it, there's an expansion coming out soon. It's just so good. I love this game, and I wish that I could play it even more often. That is Shadow Rift from Game Night Productions. But Sister Ray says, a cooperative Thunderstone that somehow manages to be more kludgy, and far less fulfilling than the game it borrowed from. For a co-op that clearly wanted to tell a story, none of it made it to the final product. This game got the bone. I don't know what that means. My number 56 is the other Stonemaier Games production on my top 100 list, and that is Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia. This is a worker placement game with a phenomenal theme. Some people have said it's a little too dark, but I love it. I think it's tongue-in-cheek enough to not be too dark. You are essentially like an evil person in this dystopian future, and you are using your brainwashed worker peasants to try and make a play for power against the other players, representing the other like despot warlords of this dystopian future. But the theme is such that you can choose to make them, you know, smarter in order to make them better workers, but if you do that, they may run away from you because they get too smart, and there's like a choice that you have to make to either be sort of a benevolent warlord and give them their freedom, or to not, and it all gets down to these really cool mechanics of going around the board and trying to get different resources and having your workers get these different resources, and it's all dice worker placement, which is such an awesome concept that more and more games are starting to use, but I think Euphoria is still the game that has done it best. Awesome theme, awesome gameplay, the game looks beautiful, wonderful components. Even if you just get the retail version like I did, it all just works really, really well, and I want to play it right now. That's how good it is, and I can't wait to see more expansions and stuff that they can do with this game. That is Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia from Stonemaier Games. However, D. Corbin says, one of the rare times that I regretted a board game purchase. Whew. Now, I talked a lot earlier in this section of the list about gateway games, and I have another one for you here, but one that I think has been criminally overlooked in the past couple of years, and that is Origin from Matagot and I think Asmodee by extension, my number 55. This is a pretty abstract game about trying to build a civilization of like wandering primitive people. I guess building a civilization is the wrong word. You're just essentially trying to survive and spread out and I guess spread your seed, so to speak. But you're doing this by moving these incredibly cool looking wooden pawns around the board that are all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it's hard to describe here, but you have to place your workers in such a way that you're breeding new people from the tribe that you start with, but they can't be too different because but the ones that you take and put out can't be too different because they still share some common characteristics. That actually sounds like a very thematic game, but it's actually pretty abstract. But that's okay because the gameplay is fast. It works very well. You have these different goals that you're going for spreading around across the map. It's very simple, but it's still very strategic. It plays very quickly, and it just looks gorgeous. Not even just the wooden pawns, but the board itself and all the different artwork on the cards. Everything just looks great, and I wish that the game got more love because it's just a fantastic game to play with people that are new to the hobby while still having something to offer for gamerly gamers, so to speak. So if you can get a copy, I urge you to check it out because it is well worth it. That is Origin from Matagot and I think Asmodee. However, Owlzette says, words, meanings, shrug. My number 54 is Trieste from Victory Point Games. Now, Victory Point Games is usually known for heavy, complex games with a lot of chits and tokens and a lot of solitaire games, and none of them look that good either. But Trieste breaks that mold by being a fairly light card game for exactly 3 players with some really awesome artwork as well, although the component quality of the cards is still not as good like most of Victory Point Games stuff. Nevertheless, the theme is good too, even though like the gameplay itself is very light too, but you are these different factions vying for control of this city. You have the Merchants Guild, the Thieves Guild, and the City Watch. The Merchants Guild is trying to get a lot of money, but the Thieves Guild is trying to steal from the merchant and therefore build an infamous reputation and win that way. But the City Watch is trying to capture the thieves and win the game by capturing as many thieves as possible, while at the same time trying to keep the merchant in check by taxing him heavily. So I love that back and forth. I love that, you know, it's this sort of a triangle of balance of people trying to outwit each other and pull ahead of the pack while still dealing with all the setbacks from the other player. That is just such a cool thing in any kind of game when you have that type of system. Like I said, good artwork. I love the way the money system in this game works, drawing cards from the treasure deck. I mean, it's just great, and I wish that more people knew about it and, you know, liked it as much as I do, because it's a fantastic card game, and I think it would be great for a lot of different gamers. That is Trieste from Victory Point Games. However, Crackers says, my number 53 is Lost Legends from Queen Games. Now, I love card drafting mechanics. They don't always work in every game that I've played. Like, I don't like Seven Wonders very much, although I do love Seasons, spoiler alert. But it works particularly well in Lost Legends because the theme is so strong. You're a group of adventurers who are going down into this dungeon, but before you can do that, you need to prepare. You're adventurers, so you need to go to the shop, you need to get as much equipment as possible. You need to get swords, you need to get armor, you need to get magic spells, you need to get magic accessories, spell books, all these different things. And that's where the draft comes in. You have this pre-draft where you gear up with all this stuff, and sometimes you need money, so you need to turn in the cards that you draft for money instead, and sometimes you need the skills necessary in order to actually equip this stuff, so you make these cards into skills too. So again, not only is it card drafting, but you have one of my other favorite card mechanics of using a card for multiple different things. And once you get done with all of that, you actually have to go into the different levels of the dungeon and fight the monsters. And this game is brutally difficult. The learning curve here is very steep, and the first time, if you have a new group of players, the first time you go into the game, you are all going to be destroyed and not know what you're doing, because you need to draft properly before you go down and fight those monsters. And if there's one experienced player at the table, he will probably destroy the other players. That's just the kind of game this is, but I still enjoy it. I love the whole idea of, if you don't want to fight the monster in front of you, you can run away from it, which means that the next guy has to take the monster, but only if they have an open spot in front of them. If everyone's got monsters in front of them, you're hit, and you might just die if you can't defeat it with all the stuff that you have. And there's so many rounds of play where you just squeak by the skin of your teeth. I like it. I like it a lot. It needs an expansion desperately, so Queen Games, please give us an expansion. But even without it, it's still a solid game. That is Lost Legends from Queen Games. However, Wittold Janik says, I haven't played so broken a game for so long. Disaster. Unbalanced, random, and unfair. It couldn't be playtested by some responsible and clever testers, or I'm Pope. Title should be Completely Lost 3 Hours. My number 52 is Fairy Tale, now from Z-Man Games, but there were other editions of the game from other companies. This is another example of games with similar mechanics lumping up on my list, because just like Lost Legends, this game involves card drafting, but for two major differences. One, Fairy Tale is much lighter. It's almost a filler game. Also, it is all drafting. Lost Legends, once you get done with the draft, you actually have to fight monsters and things. Fairy Tale is all drafting, and you're drafting these cards trying to make sets of cards in order to get points. And the theme is pretty pasted on. You have all this different fantasy artwork, which looks really, really attractive, especially in the newest edition. But they'll represent fairies and dragons and dwarves and elves and dragon babies and all this, but it doesn't really matter. What it's all about is making those sets and getting those points. And the game can have kind of a steep learning curve trying to figure out what the icons mean and figuring out how the points are scored. But once you get over that, the game is very accessible, very fast. It's very simple, but it has a lot of strategic depth to it. I like it a lot. You know, if you don't like card drafting, stay away from it like the plague. But if you do, if you like the card drafting of games like Seven Wonder, but you want something just a little bit lighter and a little bit faster, Fairy Tale is the way to go. It's been a big hit in my group, and it will probably always be in my collection of games. One of my favorite smaller card games. Fairy Tale, now from Z-Man Games. That is my number 52. However, Soapbox 824 says, didn't actually play, but I sat in a room listening. My number 51, just barely missing the top 50, is Summoner Wars from Plaid Games. Now, just because it missed the top 50 doesn't mean that it's not a fantastic game. In fact, to get this far up the list means it has to be something special. And I really believe that in the case of Summoner Wars. Now, I'm a former Magic player. I played way back in the day. Like, I'm talking like I got in on an Unlimited Edition is when I think I jumped into it and went through Ice Age and Alliances and all these different blocks before quitting sometime around Dark Steel. And I even picked it up a few years ago when I started dating a girl who was still into it. That's usually how these things go. But I could never stick with Magic because, number one, the whole collectible thing just killed it for me. And also, it just didn't feel like there was enough game for me there. And I know that there are competitive Magic players who want to choke me for saying that, but it always felt the same to me. It always felt like if you lived and died depending on how your deck was built and how you drew cards from that deck. In Summoner Wars, much of the game, yes, can be decided by how you draw your cards, but it's all about the battlefield. This is essentially a tactical skirmish miniatures game without the miniatures. You are moving cards around the battlefield, and while that doesn't sound that phenomenal, it really, really works well. You are doing the same kind of things you would do in Magic, like summoning units and trying to take out your opponent's life points, in this case, the summoner on your opponent's team. But it just works so much better. There's all kinds of different units, and they all have different special abilities. And there's tons of different factions at this point. But even if you never buy another faction, they're not collectible. They're just little expansion packs, so you don't have to worry about randomness or spending a ton of money chasing rares. But even if you never bought another expansion pack, just the Master Set has so many factions, so many cool combinations. You'll never play the same game twice. It's just awesome. The artwork looks good. There's tons of different abilities and just, a skill, there is randomness, there is a die roll, but I kind of like that because it represents the randomness of war. And I still maintain to people who complain about the dice rolls that a skilled player in Summoner Wars will destroy you. Doesn't matter what the dice rolls say. That's what I enjoy about this game. And the Alliances set is coming out soon. Oh man, there's just so much to be had here. If you're looking for that Magic fix without the collectible aspect and spending thousands of dollars, you should already be playing this game. Summoner Wars from Plaid Games, my number 51, just missing the top 50. But Omega Zion says, I hate the fact that throwing away 90% of your cards is a good strategy. It's like my deck is simply the champions and everything else is Magic pile material. The dice rolling is pointless. The fact that I only need to roll 3 or more means you're going to hit most of the time anyways. It's just there to create an artificial tenseness. All right, well that's it. Next to the list, we are getting into the top 50. I am super eager to get to it because there are some great games coming up, guys, really, and I'm just super excited to talk about them. Thank you so much for coming all this way with me. I hope you can hang in there because it's going to get good. Thank you so much. Take care.